left alone in a scorching field. A tiny German Shepherd puppy was so weak even vultures had started to gather. No one expected him to survive, except for one soldier who refused to walk away. It started on one of those Texas afternoons that feels less like weather and more like a warning. The kind of heat that wraps itself around your body like a heavy, wet blanket you can't pull off. No clouds, no wind, just the sun, glaring like an open furnace above the empty, desolate land. In the middle of this dry nowhere, where even insects had given up flying, there was a stretch of field that hadn't seen life in weeks. No water, no crops, just cracked, sun-baked earth that seemed to groan under the weight of the day. And then there was something else, something still. At first, it looked like trash, just a dark, shapeless bundle dumped carelessly in the middle of the open field. You'd miss it if you weren't looking closely. Easy to dismiss as an old shirt, a bag, maybe something that had blown off a passing truck. But the vultures had noticed it. 6 of them, maybe more. Big, ugly things with bald red heads and beady, hungry eyes. They circled above, crying out in that eerie, metallic croak that vultures seem to use when death is near. Some were already grounded, walking in slow, expectant circles around the thing in the dirt, waiting, watching. And then the bundle moved. Barely, just the faintest twitch of a paw. It wasn't trash. It was alive. A puppy, a German Shepherd, barely 2 months old by the look of him. His body was so frail, it looked like it had collapsed under its own weight. His fur, once likely soft and thick, was patchy, matted with mud and blood. You could count every rib. Every bone stuck out like it didn't belong under skin. His eyes were closed, but not because he was sleeping. This wasn't rest. This was surrender. He wasn't barking, wasn't whining, just lying there, as still as the rocks around him, as if he'd decided, or been forced, to give up. But that wasn't the most haunting part. What haunted people later, when they saw the photos, was how calm the puppy looked, as if he'd already accepted the end, as if, in his short life, he'd learned that crying out didn't bring help, that no one was coming. And in most stories like this, that's where it would have ended, because this part of Texas doesn't get much traffic. No footpaths, no hiking trails, no nearby farms. It wasn't somewhere you could even stumble upon. You had to be heading nowhere to find it, and no one, especially not in that heat, goes nowhere. So how did he get there? And why? That was the question everyone would be asking later. But right now, at this moment, the only thing that mattered was this. He had hours left, maybe minutes. The vultures weren't waiting for him to die. They were waiting for his body to cool. That's how close he was. And no one knew. No one except for one man. But let's not jump ahead just yet. Backtrack to that morning. A military convoy had passed through the area earlier that day, part of a routine National Guard operation moving supplies across rural Texas. Among the soldiers in the convoy was Sergeant Jason Daniels, 34 years old, a 10-year veteran of 2 tours overseas. Not the kind of man who wore his emotions on his sleeve, but the kind of man who always noticed details. And on that particular day, Jason was restless. He wasn't even supposed to be on this route. A last-minute schedule change had bumped him from a southern base to a detour here. What was supposed to be a short resupply errand turned into an overnight trip in the middle of nowhere. The roads were bad, the GPS had gone haywire, and the heat had everyone on edge. Most of the convoy had parked near a rundown gas station to wait for a second truck to catch up. But Jason, he needed a moment alone, so he did what he always did when his thoughts got heavy. He got out of the vehicle and started walking. Just a short walk. Stretch the legs. Clear the mind. He didn't even know where he was headed. Just followed the horizon. That's when he saw the vultures. At first, he didn't think much of it. Vultures were a common sight out here. Roadkill, old livestock, even trash brought them out. But something about the way they were acting, it got under his skin. They weren't feasting. They were waiting. He walked closer. 5 steps. 10. Enough to realize that the thing in the middle of the circle wasn't garbage. And when he got within 20 feet, he stopped cold. Because it wasn't just that the puppy was dying. It was how utterly alone he looked doing it. Jason had seen death before. Too much of it. But something about this hit differently. Maybe it was the size of the dog. So small it didn't seem real. Maybe it was the way the vultures didn't scatter when he approached, like they knew they were going to win eventually. Maybe it was the heat, or the silence, or the fact that Jason was already carrying 1,000 other burdens that day. But in that moment, something cracked open inside him. He took off his shirt and ran. When Jason reached the puppy, the vultures flapped away a few feet, almost annoyed at the interruption. He knelt down and touched the dog's side. The skin was burning. Every bone beneath it felt sharp, wrong. He could feel the shallow breaths, barely there. The puppy didn't even flinch. He just let the man touch him like he was already gone. Jason wrapped him in a shirt, cradled him like a child. Then he stood there in the heat, heart pounding, mind racing, because now he had a choice to make. There were no vets nearby, no animal hospitals. The convoy didn't even have proper medical supplies for dogs. This place was too remote, too forgotten. So what do you do when you find a life on the edge of death, and you're the only one who knows it exists? Let's rewind again, because to understand what happened next, you need to understand the man who found him. Jason Daniels wasn't always a soldier. He used to be a boy who loved dogs more than anything. Grew up with a German shepherd named Gunnar. They were inseparable, until one night, when burglars broke into their home. Gunnar attacked to protect the family, and didn't survive. Jason was 12. That night shaped the rest of his life. It made him want to protect people. It made him want to serve, but it also left a wound that never healed. He never owned another dog, couldn't bring himself to. So when he looked down at the dying shepherd puppy, part of him saw Gunnar, not as he had died, but as he might have lived. And that's when he made his decision. Jason turned back toward the road, cradling the puppy to his chest, ignoring the heat, ignoring the sweat, ignoring the weight of everything he was carrying. He ran, back at the convoy. The other soldiers were loading up. Jason shouted for help, startling a few of them. When they saw what he was carrying, some didn't understand at first. Just a dog. Why risk stopping for that? But one medic, a young woman named Carla, didn't hesitate. She cleared out the back seat of one truck and told him to lay the puppy down. She got to work immediately. Hydration, shade, checking for fleas, ticks, infection, anything they could treat right then and there. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew the odds weren't good. Neither did Jason. But here's the thing about some people and some animals. When the world gives them every reason to die, they fight anyway. And that's what this puppy did. His name, Jason would later decide, would be Chance, because that's all he had been given. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The vultures knew. Animals always do. They circled above the field, like they were waiting for time to do its job. Patient, predictable. They didn't dive or peck yet. They didn't have to. Whatever that small creature was, it wasn't moving. It wasn't resisting. It was just waiting for whatever came next. Down on the ground, the air shimmered from the heat. The grass, if you could even call it that, was more like brittle straw. The dirt beneath, it was the kind that cracked into sharp puzzle pieces, the kind that hadn't felt rain in months. Everything about this place felt forgotten, like time itself had passed over it and left it behind. And lying right there, in the middle of it all, was the puppy. He had no name, no collar, no strength left in his legs. His ribs jutted out like the frame of a broken umbrella, and his eyes, though open, seemed to be staring at nothing at all. Dull, empty, the way eyes look when they've given up. At some point, someone had brought him here. That much was obvious. There were no paw prints in the dirt, suggesting he'd wandered. No signs of struggle or escape. No other animal tracks. Just tire marks, faint, but still there, about 30 yards away, leading to nowhere. As if someone had driven out to the middle of this godforsaken land, opened a door, and dumped him out like garbage. Maybe they thought no one would find him. Maybe that was the point. And for a while they were right. No one came. Not for hours. Not even a shadow moved across that field, except for the vultures overhead. The sun climbed higher. The dirt got hotter. And the puppy stopped blinking. Miles away, on a long stretch of cracked road, an old military truck hummed quietly along. Dust trailed behind it like a tail, kicked up by tires that had seen too many miles. Inside, the soldier behind the wheel squinted into the heat. He wasn't heading anywhere special, just driving, thinking, trying to keep his mind busy. He'd only been back in the States for 3 weeks. Technically, he was on leave, but rest didn't come easy, not after what he'd been through. Sergeant Miguel Ramos had done 3 tours. He'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. Bombs, burned pits, friends going home in flag-covered boxes. And yet, none of that had prepared him for the silence of home. The way everything here just moved on, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't happened. Some nights, he couldn't sleep. Other nights, he didn't want to. So instead, he drove. Long stretches of road with no destination. Just silence, and the occasional radio station that fizzled in and out of static. On that particular afternoon, something told him to take the back road. He didn't question it, just turned the wheel. Maybe he was avoiding the freeway. Maybe he was chasing peace. Maybe it was something else entirely. Fate, maybe. He didn't know he was about to drive past death, and right into something that would change everything. From the truck, The field looked like every other patch of Texas land in the summer, dry, dead, and endless. But Sergeant Ramos had a soldier's eye. He noticed movement where others wouldn't, patterns, inconsistencies, and what caught his attention that day were the vultures. They weren't flying aimlessly. They were focused, hovering, not diving, not feeding, just watching, waiting, like guards around a secret. It took him less than 5 seconds to pull over. He didn't know what he'd find. A dead deer, maybe. A cow. Roadkill that had been dragged off by something. But the soldier in him was trained not to assume. Always check, always know. So he parked, killed the engine, grabbed his canteen, and started walking. The field crunched under his boots. The heat slammed into him like a wall, thick and angry. With every step, the vultures shifted uneasily, flapping their wings, but not leaving. As he got closer, a foul smell hit his nose. Not rotting exactly, just decay, old sweat, desperation, and then he saw it. At first, he thought it was a rag, then maybe a dead animal. But when he got close enough to kneel down, he saw eyes. They were barely open, just slits, glazed over with dirt and dust, but undeniably alive. The puppy didn't react to the soldier's shadow, didn't lift his head, didn't flinch. He just lay there, as if the act of breathing had already taken everything he had left. Sergeant Ramos's heart dropped into his stomach. This wasn't just a case of an injured animal. This was neglect, abandonment, torture in slow motion. He dropped to one knee, brushing dirt away from the puppy's face. It was crusted into the fur, stuck to dried blood and old wounds. The soldier whispered, "Hey, buddy, you still with me?" No response. He put his canteen to the puppy's lips and dribbled a bit of water. For a second, nothing happened. Then, just barely, the tongue moved. Licked once, twice, swallowed. That was all Sergeant Ramos needed to see. This was now a rescue mission. The soldier scooped the puppy into his arms, gently, as if holding something made of glass. The animal was limp, but not cold. Not yet. That meant there was still time. As he walked back toward the truck, the vultures finally flew away, no longer interested in what they couldn't claim. He laid the puppy on the passenger seat, wrapped in an old army jacket he kept for cold nights. The puppy's breathing was shallow, but steady. Still no sound, no whimper, just eyes that barely stayed open. Sergeant Ramos turned the key in the ignition and floored it. He didn't know exactly where he was going. The nearest vet was over an hour away, but he didn't care. He just kept driving. The road was rough. Every bump made the puppy twitch. The soldier kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently on the animal's chest, as if reassuring it with every mile. Stay with me. Time blurred. Every second felt like an hour. The engine roared louder than usual, but nothing was louder than the pounding in Sergeant Ramos's chest. He had seen death before, faced it, walked through it, but this was different. This wasn't war. This wasn't chaos. This was a creature who'd been forgotten, left behind by someone who didn't care enough to make sure he'd die quickly, someone who had chosen suffering over mercy. And Sergeant Ramos couldn't get that thought out of his head. At a red light on the edge of town, he looked over at the bundle beside him. The puppy's eyes were closed now. His chest still rose and fell barely, but there was no telling how long that would last. "Hang in there, buddy," Ramos whispered. "We're almost there." But even he wasn't sure. The town came into view like a mirage, shimmering in the heat. A few buildings, a gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. Not much else. But Sergeant Ramos wasn't looking for a place to rest. He needed help, fast. He remembered seeing a sign a few miles back. Brink Animal Clinic, 14 miles. He didn't know where exactly it was, but he knew one thing. That sign was his mission now. He gunned it through the stoplight, ignoring the stares from a couple walking their dog. He didn't have time to explain. He barely had time to think. Every second was a countdown. He looked over again. The puppy's breathing was even shallower now, barely visible. Every inhale looked like a struggle, as if the little body wasn't sure it was worth trying anymore. "No," Ramos said, louder this time. "You don't quit on me. Not now." His voice cracked. He didn't know why. He'd held dying men in his arms before. He'd zipped up body bags. But this was different. This wasn't someone who'd signed up for danger. This was a baby who had trusted someone and had been left in the dirt. He followed the road like a lifeline, white knuckles on the wheel, eyes scanning for the next sign. At last, he saw it. Brink Animal Clinic, next left. He slammed the brakes, skidded into the turn, and peeled into a gravel lot that sprayed rocks in every direction. The clinic looked modest, small, more like a converted house than a full vet hospital, but it didn't matter. At that moment, it was the most important place on earth. He jumped out of the truck, cradling the puppy against his chest, jacket and all. The creature didn't even stir. As he burst through the doors, the receptionist gasped. "Sir, He's dying," Ramos interrupted. "Please, help him." Without hesitation, the staff leapt into motion. A tech called for Dr. Burke, who emerged from the back, still wearing gloves and holding a chart. One look at the bundle in Ramos's arms, and everything changed. "Bring him in here," the doctor said, pushing open the nearest exam room. "Quick!" Ramos laid the puppy down on the steel table, watching as the vet began a flurry of checks. Heart rate, breathing, pupillary response, all slow, all fading. "Was he hit?" the vet asked. "No," Ramos said. "Left, in the middle of a field. No water, no food. Don't know how long he was out there." The vet's jaw tightened. "I've seen bad," Dr. Burke muttered. "But this..." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he turned to the tech. "I need subcutaneous fluids, warm blankets, glucose drip, and oxygen now." The next 10 minutes were a blur of tubes, towels, beeping machines, and controlled panic. Sergeant Ramos stood in the corner, fists clenched, sweat pouring down his back. He felt helpless. He hated feeling helpless. He watched as the puppy's tiny chest struggled against the oxygen mask. The vet wrapped a warm towel around his body, gently massaging his legs to stimulate circulation. A drip fed fluid into his side. Still no sound, no twitch, just stillness. The vet turned to Ramos. "Whatever happened to him out there? He's in critical condition. We're going to do everything we can, but I won't lie, he's not out of the woods." Ramos nodded once. "Just don't let him die alone." Minutes ticked by like hours. The machines beeped. The vet worked in silence. The techs moved with practiced urgency. And Sergeant Ramos just stood there, eyes locked on the little bundle. He didn't know why this was hitting him so hard. Maybe it was because he knew what abandonment felt like. Coming home from war to find nothing waiting for you. People crossing the street to avoid the man in uniform. Nightmares you couldn't tell anyone about. Everyone said, "Thank you for your service," but didn't stick around for the broken pieces. Maybe that was it. Or maybe it was the way the puppy hadn't even tried to fight, as if he'd already decided his fate, as if someone had taught him that being alive wasn't worth the trouble. And Ramos couldn't accept that. Not again. The hours passed. The sun dipped low, throwing golden light across the clinic walls. The vet finally came in with a soft sigh. "He's stable," he said, cautious. "For now." Ramos's heart thumped once, hopeful. "He's gonna make it?" Dr. Burke lifted a hand. "I didn't say that, but he's not fading anymore. That's a start." Then, almost reluctantly, he added, "But even if he survives, he's going to have a long road. Malnourishment, infections, emotional trauma, and God knows what else." Ramos nodded. "That's fine. Long road is better than no road." That night, Sergeant Ramos didn't go home. He sat in the clinic lobby until they finally let him visit the puppy again. He watched him sleep, curled now in a padded crate, wrapped in a fleece blanket. He looked small, so small, but his breathing was stronger. The vet had even shaved a few patches to treat sores and began antibiotics. There was an 4 running, an oxygen tube, and for the first time, his eyelids fluttered and opened. Just a sliver, just enough to see. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, but understanding. Sergeant Ramos moved closer, crouched by the crate. "Hey, soldier," he whispered. "You made it through the first day. You didn't give up." The puppy blinked again. "Barely." Ramos smiled. "Good, because I'm not letting you give up. Not now, not ever." And for the first time, the puppy let out a sound. A tiny, wheezy exhale. Almost a sigh. But it wasn't defeat. It was the first sign of life. For the next 3 days, the little German shepherd teetered on the edge of life. He didn't eat. He didn't bark. He didn't even lift his head. But he was breathing, and that was enough for Ramos to stay. The vet offered to call animal control. "If he pulls through," they said, "he'll need placement, maybe a foster, if you know anyone." Ramos shook his head every time. He didn't know why yet, but something in him had already made the decision. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a promise. On the 4th morning, the puppy moved. It wasn't much, just a twitch of his front paw as Ramos sat beside the crate, sipping lukewarm coffee. But Ramos saw it, and when he leaned closer, the puppy tried, just tried, to lift his head. It fell back down immediately, but the effort was there. Ramos smiled, eye stinging. "That's it. That's the fight I was waiting for." He reached through the crate bars and gently placed 2 fingers against the pup's scruffy chest. "You're not alone anymore, kid." Dr. Burke came in an hour later and was cautiously optimistic. "His vitals are stabilizing. Appetite might return soon. We'll try a soft slurry, easy on his stomach." Ramos nodded. I'll help, whatever it takes. The vet eyed him curiously. You military? Yeah, thought so. He paused. You ever think maybe you were meant to find him? Ramos looked down at the sleeping pup. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. By day 6, the pup could stand, for a moment at least. Wobbly legs, unsure paws, head too big for his body, but he stood. And then he stumbled forward and landed right in Ramos's lap. Ramos froze. The puppy looked up with tired eyes. And then something else happened. His nose twitched. He leaned forward slowly, shakily, and licked Ramos's hand. It wasn't much, just a touch, but it broke something wide open inside the sergeant's chest. He had been trained not to cry, but this brought him to the edge. I think he's imprinted on you, Dr. Burke joked later that afternoon. Yeah, Ramos chuckled. Poor guy doesn't know what he's in for. The vet shrugged. Could have picked worse. They both laughed, but there was heaviness behind it, because they both knew the hard part hadn't even started yet. The puppy's recovery was slow. Every step was a battle, fighting infection, adjusting to food, learning to trust. But Ramos was there every single day. He named him Shadow, because, as he put it, he'll never be left behind again. Not on my watch. And Shadow, he started to believe it. Little by little, the light came back into his eyes. His fur thickened. His body filled out. He even barked once, just once, when a car door slammed outside the clinic. It wasn't strong, but it was defiance. It was life. But just as Ramos was beginning to think they'd turned a corner, the vet found something strange. I ran another scan this morning, he said, frowning at the screen. I wanted to check for any internal damage. He clicked through the images. His organs look okay. But he zoomed in on a section near the puppy's throat. There, barely visible, was something foreign, small, embedded deep beneath the skin. Not natural. Ramos leaned in. What is that? The vet didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the phone. I need to make a call. This isn't something I can explain yet. And with that, the tone shifted from medical emergency to something else entirely. Whatever Shadow had gone through in that field, whatever he'd survived, it wasn't just abandonment. It was something darker, something no one saw coming. And Sergeant Ramos was about to uncover a truth that would turn everything on its head. Because the object buried in Shadow's throat, it wasn't a bone, it wasn't a chip, it was a piece of evidence. And it was going to blow open a case that no one even knew existed. Not yet. The small-town vet clinic had never seen anything like it. Dr. Burke had been in practice for over 20 years. He'd patched up dogs who'd tangled with rattlesnakes, performed surgeries on barn cats mauled by coyotes, and once even stitched up a goat that had somehow been struck by lightning. But this was different. The scan revealed something just beneath the puppy's skin, at the base of his neck, too symmetrical to be a shard of bone, too dense to be a cyst. Ramos watched in silence as Dr. Burke made the call, first to a colleague at the University Veterinary Hospital, then, surprisingly, to a contact at the local sheriff's department. The sergeant's brow furrowed. Why the cops? Burke hesitated. Because if I'm right, this isn't medical. It's criminal. They sedated Shadow the next morning and performed a delicate extraction. It took less than an hour. The object was removed carefully, sealed in a biohazard bag, and placed on the exam table under bright fluorescent light. Ramos leaned over it, squinting. It was a microchip, but not the standard pet ID chip used by animal shelters. No, this one was different, smaller, sleeker, engraved. Burke picked it up with tweezers. This is military grade. Ramos stiffened. You sure? Burke nodded grimly. I've seen something similar once. Black market tracking tech, not legal, not registered. Ramos was silent. Shadow, still groggy from sedation, lay curled up in a blanket, whimpering softly. Someone had implanted this thing in him, not for his safety, not for identification, for tracking, or worse. Ramos took the chip home. It sat on his kitchen table that night, glowing faintly under the overhead lamp. He stared at it like it was a snake coiled and waiting. Questions circled in his mind, faster than he could catch them. Who would do something like this? Why implant a puppy starved, dumped, practically dead, in the middle of nowhere? And why did they want to find him again? Because that's what the chip was for. Ramos had seen enough in his deployments to recognize this tech. Encrypted frequency, passive responder, designed not to be detected by commercial scanners. This wasn't for pet recovery. This was surveillance. The next morning, he called in a favor, not an official one, a friend from his old Army intel unit, Liam. Ramos didn't say much on the phone, just that he needed help and it was urgent. Liam arrived that night with a laptop, an encrypted USB, and a six-pack of beer. He wasn't laughing when Ramos showed him the chip. Within 5 minutes of plugging it into a makeshift reader, Liam froze. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Jesus. What? Ramos asked. Liam turned the screen. Lines of code scrolled like a waterfall. This thing, it's got GPS pings going back months, maybe longer, but that's not the scary part. He clicked open a file. There on the screen was a name, a government project, something called Echo Silence. Ramos's stomach dropped. He'd heard whispers during his last tour. Black budget ops, canine units being tested for covert surveillance, implanted, monitored, trained to infiltrate. Some said it was just a rumor. Others said it was worse. They were tagging dogs. Ramos whispered. Liam shook his head. Not just tagging, programming. These chips, they're behavioral override implants. Experimental, illegal as hell. Behavioral, yeah, triggered commands. Target recognition, think CIA-style mind control. But in a dog. Ramos looked at Shadow, sleeping peacefully on the couch. You're telling me someone turned him into a weapon? No, Liam said. I'm telling you someone tried. And that changed everything. Shadow wasn't just a rescue anymore. He was a survivor of something deep and hidden and dangerous. Ramos felt a pit grow in his stomach. Because if someone went to the trouble of tagging that puppy with a device this advanced, if he was part of Echo Silence, then the people behind it weren't going to let him go. Not without a fight. 2 days later, the vet clinic was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except the scanned files and Shadow's medical records. Ramos got the call at 3:12 a.m. He was there by 3:45. Bert met him with a flashlight and a trembling hand. They knew what they were looking for, the vet said. Went straight to the back, pulled the hard drive, left everything else untouched. Ramos stared at the broken cabinet. No prints, none we could find. Security cameras? Disabled. It wasn't a robbery, it was a cleanup, and it confirmed Ramos's worst fear. Someone was hunting the dog, and now they were getting close. That night, Ramos didn't sleep. He paced his living room, lights off, hand resting on the pistol at his waist. Shadow stayed close, never more than a few feet away. The pup had changed in recent days. More alert, watching doors, listening to distant sounds, as if he remembered something buried deep. Ramos leaned down and scratched behind his ears. I don't know what they did to you, buddy, but they're not getting you back. Not while I'm breathing. Shadow licked his hand softly, and for the first time in a while, Ramos didn't feel alone. 3 days later, the first attempt happened. It was late evening. Ramos was walking Shadow in the open field behind his property when he noticed the silence. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of gravel, and then the sharp click of a camera shutter. He turned instantly. Across the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, was a man, tall, dressed in all black, holding a long-lens camera. Their eyes met. The man didn't run. He simply turned, stepped into the woods, and vanished. Shadow stood rigid, tail high, body tense. He growled, low and deep, the kind of growl Ramos had only ever heard in combat zones. Yeah, he muttered. I saw him too. That night, he reinforced the windows, loaded every weapon he had, and called Liam again. They're watching, Ramos said. They're making moves. Liam was quiet for a long time. Then we need to make one first. The next morning, they began digging, and what they found next was a trail of missing dogs. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labs, all reported lost across the same stretch of counties in rural Texas, all within the last year. Some found dead, others never found at all, and a few, just a few, had owners who reported strange behavior in the days before their dogs vanished. Panic attacks, sudden aggression, fear of certain people, and in 2 of the cases, the owners were former military, like Ramos, like targets, like bait. And then, Liam found the connection. A facility, decommissioned. On paper, it didn't exist anymore, but satellite images showed recent vehicle activity, heat signatures, even outdoor kennels. In the middle of nowhere, less than 60 miles from the field where Shadow had been found. Ramos stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. That's where it started, he said. Liam nodded, and it might be where it ends. Ramos looked down at Shadow, who had just placed his paw gently on his boot. Eyes sharp, ears up, he was ready. Whatever they tried to do to him hadn't broken him, it had forged him, and together, they were about to walk into the fire. They waited for nightfall, not just because darkness would give them cover, but because what they were about to walk into wasn't a job for daylight. This was the kind of mission men came back from changed, if they came back at all. Liam pulled the Jeep to the edge of the overgrown road, headlights off, engine running on battery mode. Last chance to walk away, he muttered, double-checking his sidearm. Ramos shook his head slowly. They used this dog like a weapon. then threw him away like trash. He glanced at Shadow, who sat alert in the back seat, eyes focused, posture still. They're not doing it again. No more words were needed. The facility looked like an abandoned grain silo from the outside. Rusting walls, broken fence line, faded military signage, half covered by brush. But the closer they got, the clearer the lie became. Infrared sensors, fresh tire tracks, a security panel covered in dust, but with an unmistakably new keypad. Ramos crouched low near the side gate. Liam handed him a jammer, already programmed to knock out cameras for 60 seconds. Once we're in, we don't stop moving. Understood. He turned to Shadow and whispered, "Stay close." No matter what, the door clicked open. Silence inside. The hallway smelled of bleach and electricity. Fluorescent lights flickered. Some buzzed. Some didn't work at all. But further down there was sound. Low, mechanical, and barking. But not ordinary barking. Desperate barking. Agonized. Dozens of dogs, muffled behind thick metal doors. Ramos gritted his teeth. They were still doing it. They moved fast, checking doors, clearing corners. Liam hacked into a mainframe on the second floor and quickly found the central hub. But the moment he accessed the server, everything changed. Alarms blared. Motion sensors picked them up. Red lights filled the corridors. They were made. From the far side of the building, boots thundered on tile. Shadow stood beside Ramos, body rigid. Then he moved. Without command, without hesitation, straight into the smoke. The hallway turned into chaos. Men in tactical gear came through the double doors, shouting, muzzles up, trained. But before they could react, Shadow was there. Fast, precise, trained for this. No, born for this. He took down one, then another, using nothing but his strength, speed, and an uncanny ability to predict their next move. Ramos followed behind, covering flanks, but Shadow was the storm. He wasn't just fighting, he was remembering. They reached the core room. Inside were cages, dozens of them, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, huskies, all trained, all silent, watching, each with the same small scar behind the neck, each implanted. Shadow stopped at one cage and began to whine, low and long. Ramos recognized the look in his eyes. Recognition, family. These weren't just test subjects. They were his unit. A scientist bolted from a side room. He didn't get far. Ramos pinned him to the ground with his knee, gun pressed to his temple. "Who's in charge here?" he hissed. The man choked out a name. A government contractor. Same one that had supposedly been shut down 2 years ago after Congress defunded biotech animal combat initiatives. But they hadn't stopped. They'd just gone dark, kept experimenting, kept hurting these animals. With Liam's help, Ramos uploaded the full server contents to 3 encrypted clouds, then sent them to every media contact he had from his army days. Within minutes, the digital trail began to explode. Evidence, proof, names, experiments, maps, all of it. But they still had to get out, and they weren't leaving without the dogs. Ramos shot open the cages. At first, the dogs were frozen, unsure. But Shadow stepped forward, turned to them, and barked once, clear, commanding. And then, they moved. Dozens of dogs flooding through the halls, past their former tormentors, toward freedom, toward the open night. By the time the authorities arrived, tipped off by leaked footage and GPS coordinates, Ramos and Liam were long gone. So was Shadow, and 26 other dogs. Free, safe, finally free. Back at the house, Ramos knelt in the field where he'd first found Shadow. The stars were bright, the air still. Shadow sat beside him, tail gently swaying in the dirt. Ramos reached into his pocket and held up the microchip that had started it all, the one they'd removed from Shadow's neck. He placed it on a rock, then raised his boot and crushed it. The sound was small, but it felt like thunder. That night, Shadow curled up at Ramos's feet by the fire. No longer a weapon, no longer a number, no longer anyone's project, just a dog, a brave, loyal, impossibly strong dog who had survived the worst and found his way home. Shadow's story is more than just a rescue. It's a powerful reminder of the strength found in second chances. What began as a forgotten, broken puppy abandoned to die became a symbol of hope and courage. Thanks to Ramos's bravery and heart, Shadow and those other dogs were given a new life, a life where they weren't weapons or experiments, but companions who deserved love and freedom. This story shows us how compassion can change lives, not just for animals, but for humans too. Because when we choose to stand up for those who can't speak for themselves, we're reminded of the best parts of humanity, the parts that refuse to give up, no matter how dark the night. And Shadow, he's living proof that even in the hardest moments, Hope can find a way. If you believe in second chances, hit subscribe and don't miss the next story that will warm your heart.